decent people form a minority in this world, and they always will remain in the minority in this world, in my opinion. And therein I see the challenge to join the minority, the decent people. So wrote Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, in his very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. This is the third in a series of programs I'm doing on human life and what the great thinkers in literature, psychology, philosophy, and religion have said about human life. Let me provide a brief review of the first two segments. In part one, I talked about how famous thinkers have described human life, and I provided a description of human life by Shakespeare, Cervantes, Montaigne, and several other thinkers. I think Montaigne, the French essayist, provides a good overview and a good summary in a certain sense of how many of the famous thinkers have described human life. Montaigne said that life is bittersweet, and he said it's the sweetness that keeps us going, that sustains us. And he said the bitter aspect of life, which involves our stress and our anxiety, since life, he said, is somewhat bitter, it makes it easier to die. Montaigne said that he believed if life was completely sweet, without any bitterness, dying would be far more difficult. Last week, I addressed myself to the question, what is the purpose of human life? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? And as always, I provided several viewpoints. I began with the Hebrew prophets of the Old Testament, who claim that our main purpose in life is to promote goodness and justice. And I also indicated that many other famous thinkers, such as Tolstoy and Gandhi, espoused that viewpoint. Another group of famous thinkers have emphasized the idea that expanding knowledge and consciousness is our primary aim in life. They claim that we're here on earth to expand our awareness. They talk about an intensification of consciousness. And perhaps this is best illustrated by a remark Aristotle made in his Ethics. Aristotle said that human beings, by nature, desire to know. And of course, there is the ancient Greek maxim, know thyself, which also reflects this idea that perhaps the main purpose for us being here on earth is, again, to expand our knowledge and awareness. Besides Aristotle, the Buddha and Freud are also other famous thinkers that advocated this idea. Another group of thinkers emphasized the idea that we should strive for self-cultivation and individuation. Shakespeare's Hamlet, Polonius in Hamlet, says something that I think we're all familiar with. It's a very famous quote from Shakespeare, and it illustrates this point. Polonius says, "To thine own self be true." And Emerson, the great American essayist, put it this way. He said, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist." And among other thinkers who have emphasized this idea that perhaps our main purpose on earth is to strive towards self-cultivation and individuation, Goethe, famous German thinker, Jung, and I've already mentioned Emerson and Thoreau. These people claim, in one way or another, that the enemy is the mass man or the mass woman. In today's terms, they would say, I think, that the enemy is television and advertising and political propaganda, that if people succumb to the temptations of television, advertising, and political propaganda, it may result in that person becoming a mass man or a mass woman and not doing what these thinkers thought they should be doing, and that is striving for self-cultivation and individuation. What I'd like to do today is to talk some more about what might be the purposes of human life. And what I'd like to do is to zero in on what many of the great religions have said about this. And also, I'd like to talk about a philosophy that became somewhat popular in the 20th century, a philosophy known as existentialism, which includes, by the way, some people who are religious and some people who weren't religious. So that today I will be providing both viewpoints concerning what might be the purpose or purposes of our existence here on earth. And also, time permitting today, another question I will address myself to is, what are some of the common mistakes we human mortals make in living this life? With regard to the major religions, we know that Christianity teaches that our purpose here on earth is to achieve salvation, heaven. Catholics believe that at the very least our purpose is to avoid hell. As you know, the Catholic religion teaches about purgatory and the idea that if we're not good enough to go to heaven, we can perhaps achieve a certain status in purgatory. And after spending so much time in purgatory, the idea is then perhaps our souls will proceed to heaven. Islam also talks about the idea of salvation and heaven, and the idea that for devout Muslims, the purpose of this human life is to achieve salvation and to achieve a place in heaven. Hinduism and Buddhism are significantly different from Christianity and Islam in terms of how they see the purpose of living. Hindus and Buddhists, as you probably know, both believe in reincarnation, the idea that we die and are reborn many times. In other words, the idea is that we go through many lives, we live many lives. The Hindus and Buddhists believe that our purpose is to end the cycle of rebirth. In other words, the idea is to break the cycle so that we don't come back to life again, so that we are not reborn. And how does one go about breaking the cycle of rebirth? Well, one does it in the same way that a Christian or a Muslim hopes to achieve a place in heaven, and that is through good behavior. Judaism talks about self-perfection and social justice being among the purposes of our existence here on earth. And of course, Judaism sees self-perfection and social justice connected, that if one is living a wholesome life, then one is promoting social justice. I think Hillel, the famous Jewish sage, put it best. He said this, and this is a version of the Golden Rule. Hillel said, "What is hateful to thyself, do not do to another. This is all the law. The rest is commentary." Hillel also said this, and this again coincides with what so many Jewish people believe are the purposes of living. Hillel said this, "If I am not for me, who will be? But if I am for me only, what am I?" David S. Ariel, a Jewish scholar, has said that the goal of Judaism is for a person to touch the transcendent reality greater than oneself, to touch the transcendent reality greater than oneself. All the religions, in one way or another, preach self-conquest. They believe that the world is like a big gymnasium, and our purpose here is to develop spiritual qualities. We have to strengthen ourselves so that we can be just and behave in a just manner, even when those around us are behaving unjustly. What are some other approaches to this idea of what might be the purpose or purposes of human life, besides the ones I've already indicated? Alan Watts, very famous 20th century writer, who was an expert on Eastern philosophies and religions, said this. He said, "The emphasis, when one talks about the purpose of life, should be on the mystery of life. Let me give you his own words. Alan Watts said this: "The mystery of life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." Watts' idea was that much of life is a mystery, and we shouldn't try to figure it out, but rather live the mystery. Dostoevsky, the famous Russian writer, in his famous novel, The Brothers Karamazov, has two characters, two brothers, talking about the possible purposes of life. And one of them says this: Alyosha says that one should love life more than the meaning of it. Love life more than the meaning of it. Let me give you a brief dialogue, again from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Ivan, one of the brothers, asks Alyosha, "Love life more than the meaning of it?" Alyosha responds, "Certainly, love it regardless of logic. It's only then that one can understand the meaning of life." Was Dostoevsky an existentialist? Well, some people think he was. And what does that mean when people categorize Dostoevsky as an existentialist? Well, existentialism was a philosophy that became somewhat popular in the 20th century. And as I indicated before, there are two strands to existentialism. There is a religious existentialism and a humanist existentialism. In general, the existentialist philosophers believe that life has no apparent meaning other than what we give it. Soren Kierkegaard is considered to be the founder of existentialism. He was a 19th century Dane, and he talked about decision-making being of crucial importance in life. In fact, he said this: "Decision-making is the most important human activity. Decision-making is the most important human activity. Through making choices, we create ourselves." In other words, the existentialists believe that life has no apparent meaning other than what we give it, but through making decisions, by our actions, by deciding how we are going to live, we decide what the purpose of life is. Allow me to give you an illustration. Jean-Paul Sartre, very famous French novelist, playwright, and philosopher, was a very well-known existentialist. And in one of his books, a book entitled Nausea, he illustrates this idea of how crucial decision-making is, how crucial taking action is if we're going to give our life meaning. In this book, again, it's entitled Nausea, one of the leading characters is referred to as the self-taught man. And he's in a conversation with somebody in a crucial part of the book, and he tells this other gentleman, he says, "Monsieur, I used to be a very lonely person, but I'm not lonely anymore. Indeed, I don't even need to be with people not to be lonely. And all of this happened since I joined the Socialist Party." And what Sartre is saying here is that joining this party gave this man a reason to live, that he now has a cause to live for. So this man, the self-taught man, has given his life meaning by taking the action, by making the decision to take the action to join the Socialist Party. As I've indicated in previous programs, this was Sartre's inclination. He himself was a socialist. In fact, he's often described as a Marxist. The idea, though, in existentialism is that one doesn't have to be a socialist, one doesn't have to be a Marxist for one's life to have meaning. One can make other choices. One can join the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, do volunteer work, set up a hospice. The idea is that it's through our decision-making and our actions that we give life meaning. But it's up to us to determine what the meaning of our lives is going to be. One of the more articulate existentialists was psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who died just a few years ago. Viktor Frankl is best known for a wonderful book he wrote entitled Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning. Let me give you a little background on Viktor Frankl, because I think to really understand him, you need to know some very important facts about his life. Viktor Frankl was a Jew who spent 3 years incarcerated in Nazi concentration camps. His wife, mother, and father, and much of the rest of his family perished in concentration camps. And Frankl came to the conclusion, and he expresses this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that the main motivation of human beings in life is to find meaning. And he contrasts himself with Freud and Adler, two other very famous psychiatrists. Freud believed that the main motivation of human beings is a will to pleasure. Human beings want pleasure. Adler believed that the main motivation in people is a will to power. Adler believed that most, if not all, people have feelings of inferiority, and that people try to compensate for these feelings of inferiority by striving to have power over other people. Franklin said, I disagree with Freud and Adler. I don't believe that man's primary motivation is pleasure or power. I believe man's primary motivation is to search for meaning in his life. And Frankl went on to say that this meaning is unique and specific. This meaning is unique and specific. In other words, what might make my life meaningful might not make your life meaningful. So what I determine to be the purpose of my life does not necessarily apply to you. The question comes up, what can make our lives meaningful? Well, Frankl, in his book, talks about several possibilities. Among the possibilities are these. Frankl says that our work can make life meaningful, that being conscientious in our work and trying to serve other people can make life meaningful. And he says that another thing that can give life meaning is nurturing another human being or beings. The idea is that caring for people, loving people, can give life meaning. And he also says, interestingly enough, that a third way that we can give life meaning is by the attitude we take towards our suffering, especially towards our unavoidable suffering. Frankl talks about people who are seriously ill, or people who are caring for loved ones who are seriously ill. And he also talks about people who have serious money problems, people who don't get the job promotions they deserve, people who are unfairly imprisoned, such as he was. And Frankl says that the way we react to suffering, the way we react especially to unavoidable suffering, can give meaning to our lives. He says that a person has the freedom to choose one's attitude towards one's unavoidable suffering. He talks about the various ways in which a person can take up his cross and, as a consequence, give his life meaning. Let me give you Frankl's own words, again, about the various ways in which we can take up our crosses. The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives him an ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life. He may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish. Again, he may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish in the bitter fight for self-preservation, or he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. Here lies the chance for a man or woman either to make use of or to forego the opportunities of attaining the moral values that a difficult situation may afford him or her. What Frankl is saying, in other words, is one of the things that can give life meaning. is striving to be moral, striving to be virtuous, especially in times of adversity. Which brings me to the question, who are your heroes? Who are your heroines? Are they athletes, movie stars, billionaires, or even scholars? Well, my heroes and heroines don't fit into those categories. Let me for a moment tell you who my heroes and heroines are. And the reason I'm doing this is that I think it fits in very neatly with the theme of this program. My heroes and heroines are people who deal with adversity with strength and dignity. Usually they are people whom I believe are dealing with adversity in a much better way than I deal with adversity, and therefore I tend to look up to them. Included in this category of people who deal well with adversity are some very sick people I've known over the years who did not use their suffering as an excuse to make other people unhappy. In fact, I've known some very sick people who use their illness to increase their compassion towards other people, and indeed use their illness to reflect more deeply on what's truly important in life. Also among my other heroes and heroines are caregivers. I've known more than a few people in my life caring for people with Alzheimer's, caring for mentally retarded children, and again maintaining their dignity and strength in the face of great adversity. Also, I've known many immigrants, and among my heroes are struggling, hard-working immigrants. I spend a lot of time in Manhattan and come into contact with many immigrants, Haitians, Pakistanis, Latinos, and I find so many of their lives inspiring, and I often wonder if I could contend with the adversity they face on a daily basis, as well as they contend with it. And again, they are my heroes and heroines. Also, whistleblowers, people like Frank Serpico, Jeffrey Wigand, the tobacco industry whistleblower, who let us know about what was really going on in the tobacco industry and how harmful nicotine was to us. Also, corporate whistleblowers who try to protect the public from corporate evil doing. And in education, I very much respect teachers and administrators who attack bureaucratic inefficiency and who speak out against educational institutions that are not working. And I know many teachers and administrators who do this and are willing to sacrifice job promotion in so doing. Also, of course, I greatly respect political dissidents, people in dictatorial countries, totalitarian countries, such as China, who risk their freedom, even their lives, to promote freedom and justice in those countries. Again, these people are my heroes and heroines. Indeed, I've often thought of a test that one might give to check out the efficiency of the clergy, priests, ministers, rabbis. I've often thought it might be interesting to conduct a survey of people in different religious congregations to determine who their heroes are, to find out whether most of the people in certain religious congregations have athletes, movie stars, billionaires as their heroes, or whether in fact the majority have as heroes caregivers, those fighting injustice, and those who try to serve the public in a spirit of love. And I've often thought if a particular survey shows that a particular priest shows that the congregants of a particular priest or minister or rabbi have as their heroes athletes, movie stars, and billionaires, and not caregivers and those who fight for injustice, that maybe it's an indication that the priest, minister, or rabbi is failing in his or her mission and maybe should resign. Frankl claims that the ultimate meaning of life consists in joining the minority. Again, Viktor Frankl, this very famous psychiatrist who wrote the book entitled Man's Search for Meaning, he believed the ultimate meaning of life consists in joining the minority. And again, let me repeat the quote from his book, which I used at the top of the program. Frankl said this: "Decent people form a minority in this world. More than that, they will always remain a minority. And yet, I see therein the challenge to join the minority." What do you think, by the way, of this idea that the decent people are in a minority in this world? Pretty controversial thought, is it not? Frankl also talked about the importance of self-forgetfulness in life. And let me close with this statement from Frankl. He said, "The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is, and the more he actualizes himself." Again, in giving ourselves to a cause or loving other people, we become more human and we do more to actualize ourselves. Finally, I'd like to close with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, you recall, reminds us that we are all artists. We are all artists in living. In Walden, Thoreau wrote the following: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."